celebrate the 14th anniversary of this group. So today. So hopefully you all, anybody who's interested in cake, got to partake in that.
3 big speakers in the slot. And I got a call a few days later from the gal who arranges him, and he said, uh-oh, there was a conflict on another calendar we didn't see, he can't do it. So Danny is coming in September, I have to say. But then, what am I supposed to do with May? I never worry about these things, you have to understand. Worry doesn't even cross my mind. I just kind of go with the flow, and I know that the right and perfect person will be in the space when they're supposed to be, and for the right people. So for whatever reason that we have Bill Guggenheim here today, he is the right and perfect person. Please give him a warm welcome.
I hope everybody gets these 2 handouts. My name is Bill Guggenheim. I'm from Longwood, Florida, which is a suburb of Orlando. So I used to be from Long Island, Manhattan, and New Jersey. And the first part of my life, I was very much a materialist and things like that. I didn't believe in life after death whatsoever. Used to compare people to flashlight batteries. When the juice ran out, you threw the body away. That was it. Boom. And the discussion. Used to argue against it. I was at least an agnostic, if not more. And I was a stockbroker on Wall Street. Now that's before the bad boys. But I used to be a stockbroker for 2 small different firms on Wall Street and a securities analyst. Hated being a stockbroker, loved being a securities analyst. One reason I'm here today, or the primary reason, is because I said yes to something. And it's May 12th. This is a very significant day for me, and Diane asked me to share it with you. My spiritual awakening began 38 years ago on May 12th, 1974. At that time, I was still working in the space I was at. I was married to a woman named Judy. We had 1 child at that point. And I went on to have 2 more, 3 children in all. And she used to read books by Hans Holzer, Harold Sherman, Ruth Montgomery, and all these other books on the spinner racks about psychic phenomena and life after death and things like this, and I didn't. And I used to read books about Star Trek, Amy Scotty. And I knew that wasn't really a Star Trek, an enterprise up there. It was just a novel. And if she would treat her books like novels, we got along fine, but I couldn't accept that her stuff was real from her point of view. So we had a big argument. She cried and all that. And she said she'd get rid of all the books. So she was sneaky. She got rid of half the books, only the ones she read. She put the rest in the bedside table and continued to read them. I didn't know that. And one night, we had moved recently from New Jersey to Jupiter, Florida. So I was living on Jupiter Island in Jupiter, Florida, with the Jupiter Lighthouse right there, in an area called the Jupiter Inlet Colony. So I don't know what all that means, but anyway, I was up all night on May 11th, early May 12th, which wasn't that unusual. And I had a guidance to go get a yellow legal pad and a pen and to sit at my desk in my office, which had a big chart of the Dow Jones Industrial Average in the background. That's where I was at. And for the next 2 hours, I began receiving thoughts, which in my simple language, my brain converted thoughts into words, phrases, and sentences, which I wrote down on paper. And I wrote or received a short story, which I frankly didn't understand very well, but it seemed to be about a man who had died during the night, woke up in his living room, walked into his living room, and was able to see through the walls of his apartment, which was on the ground floor, and could see the people walking by in the morning on their way to work, things like that. Then he got dressed, went outside, and he tried to communicate with people, but nobody could hear him, nobody could see him, and then terror of terrors, people walked right through him, which caused great panic and concern. And there was a little park in the area, doesn't say where the story is, but it's fictional anyway, a little park in the area, and he went and sat down on a bench, and he looked up, and there were 2 bright lights in the sky, and like 2 suns. And when I heard that, or that came out, I thought it was science fiction. I'd never heard about going toward the light. That's my more recent understanding, but go toward the light, that's what he meant to do. because he had died during the night. But I didn't know that back then. And finally the story ended very simply with the words from the song, and that rose within him very, very silently and quietly and became more and more audible. You know, his words were, "All will be well when the day is done," which was a song that was sung by Peter, Paul, and Mary. Anyway, I woke my wife Judy up about 7 o'clock in the morning, holding these pages up like this, and with very spiritual language said, "What the hell is this?" And she turned on the light, looked at me, and said I was ghost white with fear, because I didn't know what was going on. And that was the beginning, and she read the story, she understood it, and then gradually over the next 4 months, I received writings at all hours of the day and night. Many of the majority were short stories, all which affirmed life after death, which I did not believe in. So I'm receiving short stories that my wife and another couple came by and they would read them, and they liked them, and they were pretty good. And I was never a creative writer. That was supposed to keep me out of Yale. I was supposed to be an engineer. So it's not a question of having artistic talent that I wasn't using. And I received these writings, and I began receiving New Age philosophy, some not very good poetry, but some excellent parables. Okay, I could handle that part somewhat. But then I began receiving writings from people who were deceased, dead, or people who were living. I was acting as a medium, without any background, any belief, anything. Nobody was asking me to receive these writings. I would just get them. And they'd be all handwritten out, one or several pages of paper. And then I had to decide what to do with them. Well, I was a ham, or amateur radio operator. One of the things you do as a ham, whenever you get a message, you try to deliver it. It's like being a postman, you deliver mail, rains, sleets, hail, or snow, or whatever. And so I would call my friends, the people who were living, and I knew them. I'd call them on the phone. Now everybody had known me as a stockbroker and security analyst. Nobody knew me in this new semi-occupation of being a receiver of messages from deceased loved ones. So I had to go through all the explanation. And the big question was, would you like Judy to type it up and mail it to you? And everybody said yes. And I did. And then, of course, I was wondering, how accurate are these writings? Because I had two fears. I had a fear of being wrong, obviously, but I also had a fear of being right. And that may sound strange, but you do have a fear of being right when you're doing this stuff at the beginning. And I would call the people about 2 or 3 weeks after the writing was mailed off to them, just to get their feedback. And when I was calling people on the phone for my sake, for validation, I never got it. They didn't say anything was wrong, but they just never said this was for sure, this was grandma, or that was great uncle, that was uncle so-and-so, or this was their sister. They were appreciative and they thanked me, but there was nothing concrete there. But if I held myself out on the tips of my fingers, at the very ends where I was calling for their sake, my concern for them and how they received it, I always got tremendous validation. And it was very, very heady and very intoxicating in one way, spiritually. And the validation was for very unusual things. For instance, perhaps the most unusual one that I still remember was from a man about his grandmother and grandfather who lived in Michigan. This was somebody living in Florida, but his grandparents who lived in Michigan. And of all the ways to die, one had gone out in a snowstorm for some reason to get some wood or something and got lost, and then the other one went out to find the first one and got lost, and they both froze to death in the snow, which is, I think, one of the most unusual ways for anybody to die in the United States in this day and age, 48 states. At least I hope it's unusual. Anyway, I had that. I had external visions. I had internal visions. I had things that involved a hit-and-run accident, which I reported to the Florida Highway Patrol, giving every possible disclaimer. I wanted no publicity. The last thing I wanted to do was wind up in the National Examiner or one of those newspapers. I was scared. I even hid under a bed at one point. I literally fell underneath. And on the good days that I had, it was, if this is a trick, it's a good one, because I don't know how I'm doing it. And if this is not a trick, I'm having a psychotic breakdown, I'm going to wind up in a hospital, and that's going to be the end of me. Then 35 years old. So that was the beginning. And to try to reconcile all this stuff, I began driving up to Orlando, which was 3 hours away, to study with a woman who actually spoke at one of these meetings here, Reverend Ann Gaiman, who had her own church in Orlando at that time. And I studied with her for a year. And I very quickly decided I was not going to be a medium or a psychic. That wasn't my thing to do. But I did study with her and learned a lot of different things. And I felt at least a little bit more normal after that year. And then things kind of quieted down and we went about life. And in 1977, where Hello from Heaven begins, we were living in the west coast of Florida. And Judy said, come in. There's Phil Donahue, remember him, the tall man with white hair? He had a guest on his show named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who had written all the books on death and dying. And I'd heard her name, but I didn't know who she was. And so I came in and I watched. I was very interested because she had written about near-death. She was talking about near-death experiences. And by this time I had read Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, which was the first book ever written about near-death experiences. And I actually knew some things about those experiences that weren't in the book, which I later met Raymond and found out about that nobody ever spoke about before. And it was a very nice show, but it was over, and then I went back to my still then career of investing for myself and Wall Street and all that. But ironically, the same show was on TV 2 weeks later on a cable station. And Judy showed me, said it's coming up, we want to watch it again. And so, okay, I watched it a second time. And it had her name and mailing address at the bottom. And I felt, oh, okay, I'm going to make a contribution. I believe in her work. So I felt very good. I wrote us a check and mailed it off. You know, like when the Cub Scouts come around for money or Heart Fund or any other charity, and you give $5, $10, $20 at the door. You go, that's your good deed for the day. I wrote a huge check for $25, mailed it off to Elizabeth, going, nice boy. And that's where I was at, still in 1977. And I thought that would be the end of it. But several weeks later, I received a package in the mail which contained a set of audio cassette tapes from Elizabeth called Lessons from the Dying Patient, which I really didn't want to listen to anyway. But more importantly, an invitation to attend a 5-day workshop that she was going to have on the other side of Florida, back on the East Coast, in North Palm Beach, Florida. And I felt very proud or elated or something to be invited. But as time went by, we didn't have to notify the registration office for several months. But as time went by, I realized, well, if I went, I have nothing to do with death and dying. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse, a social worker, or chaplain, nothing in those healing professions. That would just be wasting a space. So I waited to the last day of registration and called her office expecting to receive a secretary and this little talk. Please give away my space to somebody who could deserve it and, give back far more than I could. Well, as it turned out, that particular day there was a big snowstorm here nearby in Flossmoor, Illinois. And Elizabeth's secretary was a Catholic nun, could not get to work. So Elizabeth answered her own telephone. Now, if you've ever heard her speak, she has a very heavy German-Swiss accent. And I recognized her immediately. And I went through my little thing of, thank you very much, Elizabeth, for inviting me, but please give my space away. And she paused, and she said very simply, Bill, I think you should be there. And like a little boy, I said, if you think so, Elizabeth, I will. Which shows them a pushover for dominant women. So a few months later, I went, and it was not about death and dying, it was about life and living. And it was the 5 most joyous consecutive days of my entire lifetime. And there were 70 of us, we bonded. Some of us are still in contact years later, and on and on and on. And that was 1977 that I was at that workshop. And that's where I first heard a mother, somebody said that they knew the family. A mother had a daughter, a teenage daughter, who was out walking, was hit and killed by a car, along with her friend. And then she recounted how she had had a dream, she called it a dream, of her daughter, and it was very, very colorful and vivid and beautiful and very healing. And her daughter was like on a swing in a tree, in a beautiful dress, And this was the first only contact she'd had with her daughter since she had died. And you could tell, this woman was a nurse, and it was about a year later, and she was very, very healed by this experience and very uplifting. And I was happy for her that it had happened to all of us were. But when she had used the word dream, to me, dream meant not real, and I immediately discarded it. Okay? Then she went on and said that her teenage son had been in his room doing his homework one evening, and then he looked up and he saw his deceased sister standing there, and was able to describe her and everything. But that scared him, so he came running out of his own room into the living room, where his mom and dad were, saying, "Kathy's here, Kathy's here." And I thought about this briefly. I thought 15 or so year old boy seeing deceased sister in the middle of America, Peoria, Illinois, actually. That's pretty middle of America. And I thought, let's see, LSD, marijuana. Very easy to discuss these things when you're a skeptic. And so I blew that one off. Then Elizabeth told about an experience she had with a patient who had died 10 months earlier. I don't have time to describe the whole thing. It's in the book. It's a well-known experience. But a patient had appeared to Elizabeth when Elizabeth was planning to retire and not do any more research because there was so much opposition to her work from the establishment, from hospitals and doctors and whatnot. And this woman came to elicit a promise from Elizabeth that she would not resign, and Elizabeth, of course, did not resign and kept on doing her thing. So, however, when Elizabeth recounted her own experience with a patient, Betty Schwartz, who had died, it was like a crowbar could have hit the floor, and that's how quiet the room was. If a pin had hit the floor, it would have sounded like a crowbar. And I was riveted, because here was a woman who had been nominated to receive the Nobel Prize for Peace, although she didn't get enough votes to win it, but she'd been nominated. She had all these world accolades already, 1977, and her books were selling and everything. She had everything to lose, nothing to gain by sharing an experience like this. So after the workshop was over, I went back home, and I began looking for experiences of people being contacted with seeing a loved one in some way or whatever it was after they had died. And I began looking for such material. And of course, there was no internet in the 1970s. At least I wasn't on it. And there were bulletin boards a little bit later than that, but not yet. And so I used to get books from the library, and I'd find one story here, another one there, maybe 3 in a chapter. One case, a whole chapter of these kind of experiences, but nobody had named them or actually analyzed them or collected them. Nothing. It was just occasional anecdotal stories someplace. And Judy and I would talk about this endlessly and my interest in it. But I figured, well, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a PhD, I'm not a psychologist. If I wrote a book, who would buy it? That would be useless. That, I could spend years or all kinds of time, interest, money, and whatnot, but it would never get published probably, and if it did, it wouldn't get sold. So I tried to get Raymond Moody to write the book. And while Raymond never said no, he never said yes. So years went by. And in 1980, 3 years later, I had an experience of hearing a voice in my head. It was on a Sunday afternoon, and Judy and I had a conversation in our living room. We'd each gotten up to go in different directions. And the voice said, "Go outside and check the swimming pool." Now, we were living in Florida, and in Longwood as it is, and we had a screened-in pool, which is a very standard thing. It may sound luxurious, but in Florida they're a dime a dozen, frankly. And so I walked from the front of the house to the back. There was no sense of emergency to the voice. And I looked through the sliding glass doors, and we had a safety fence about 15 feet away, because we had 3 sons, and you're also required by law to have a fence around the pool. And it's all screened in except for this one fence. And I noticed that the gate was ajar, so I walked outside to just secure the gate, because our 2 older boys used to use it as a shortcut to the backyard. And when I did, I looked down at the deep end, and our youngest son, who was only 20 months old, was floating in the water, not moving. I didn't know if he was dead or alive, frankly. I screeched Judy's name, and ran down the side of the pool. And just before I jumped in the water, someplace I'd heard, take off your shoes. I don't know why, but I did. I heard that, and I did that. And I looked down, and I saw Jonathan, and he was looking up at me. His eyes were wide open. He was not moving. Had a little shortened t-shirt on and whatnot. And he seemed to be about an inch under the water, which was not a good sign. Anyway, I jumped underneath him and pushed him to the side. Judy had heard me scream. She came out, pulled him out by the wrist. And about 15 or 20 seconds later, without any CPR or anything like that, he coughed and spit up water. He was fine. And we were both shivering because it was May and the water was still cold. But he was fine, and I didn't know what to make of this, but if I had not received the message and if I had not acted upon it as well, he would have drowned, there's no doubt about it, because he didn't know how to swim and he was under the water when I saw him. So this was a wake-up call. And by the way, if nothing else I say here, if you don't believe in any of it, that's fine. That's your choice. But if you ever get an intuition or a voice or a feeling or any kind of information, stop your car, stop it. Or do this, or go check on that, or call somebody, or whatever. Do it in just a few seconds of your time. We spoke to, in the course of our research, about 3 parents who had not done that. And in one case, a son drowned in very shallow water. A grown teenage boy and dove off the dock, hit his head on a rock in the shallow water. And I'm sure he could have been resuscitated if the mother had gone out. Now, I didn't say that to her when I spoke to her, but I'm just saying to you, please, please, please listen to these things. Okay, basically, I was left with what to do about all this. And finally, in 1988, I heard the voice a second time. This time it said, Bill, do your own research, write your own book. It's your spiritual work to do. And I believe that was my father who had died when I was a little boy. I was only 8 years old. I'm the only child. I believe both times it was my father telling me this. And that was 33 years later, 1988. So, anyway, we began having to define what did we want to do. We didn't want to do anything that involved mediumship, that had been done. Didn't want to do anything involving ghosts, that had been done. So we came up with our own definition. We named these after-death communication experiences, or ADCs, and we defined it in a very tight, specific definition. And an ADC is a spiritual experience that occurs when someone is contacted spontaneously and directly by a loved one who has died, a family member or a friend who has died. Now, when they're contacted directly, it means that no third party is involved. So there are no mediums or psychics or Ouija boards or psychomantiums or devices, nothing and no one, just the one who's died and yourself. And spontaneous means that your deceased loved one chooses when, where, and how to contact you, us. Okay? We may want it to happen, we may try to make it happen, we can't, and we allow it to occur. Now, there are ways to have one, and the most common, easiest way to say is learn how to meditate. The second one is ask. Ask whoever or whatever you believe in, including your deceased loved one, your child, your whoever it is who died, or God, or Jesus, or Mary, or whatever your belief system is. Ask to have an experience while you're awake or asleep. It's easier for them to come to you if you're asleep, or to give you a sign, which we'll cover as we go along. So this is our definition. It was very tight. We didn't know if we'd find 10 people, 50 people, or 100 people the first year. Long story short, we interviewed 500 people within the first 12 months. And then we did our first workshop. Somebody mentioned the Compassionate Friends earlier. GCF was having its first was having its national conference in Tampa. Some other speakers had dropped out. They knew of us because I had contacted them asking to find people to interview. We were asked to give a workshop, and we had 300 bereaved parents in our very first workshop. And then the second one we did that day, we had over 200, which was a lot. We didn't know much about what we were talking about at that point, but we did the best we could. And it was very positive, and mainly we were afraid of saying the wrong thing and making all of them very unhappy. it worked out very well. And there was I coincidentally met a reporter from the St. Petersburg Times who came with a photographer, and she covered our 2 workshops, and the photographer took a photograph of a bereaved mother, and it was a beautiful write-up which validated our work and gave it authenticity, which we used from then on whenever we were contacting people all across the country, and people like to see a newspaper story. And we've photocopied that several thousand times. Okay, long story short, during the next total of 7 years of research, we interviewed 2,000 people who live in all 50 states, all 10 Canadian provinces, and we collected more than 3,300 first-hand accounts. I had a team of researchers that were all women who did the interviews. I just did a few, but I feel that women are better at that because people, especially men, open up more emotionally to a woman than to another man. And plus I was busy finding the people for them to interview. And I spoke with 4,000 or 5,000 people over that time period. Plus we had stories in newspapers or on television, on cable stations, things like this. We had tremendous publicity. One story was started in Orlando, and it got syndicated in 28 other newspapers in the US and Canada, telephone, with our name, address, and phone number. And the phone rang so often that if you took one call and you put the phone down before you could take your hand off, the phone rang again. So I got like 600 contacts just from that one newspaper story. So there was a lot of stuff going on. We conservatively estimate, and this is in the book, 20%, 1 out of 5 Americans have had one or more of these after-death communication experiences. That's 60 million Americans, 60 million. Other polls, we'll go into which ones they are, but they estimate it's more like 43%, which makes it like 125 million people, well over a third, actually more than 40% of the population has had one of these. Now keep in mind, many people have never even been bereaved. Why would they be contacted? You know, and some are young children, on and on and on. Although children have these experiences too, which we did not include in Hello from Heaven. We have a whole chapter of them, but we didn't put it in there. So they're very, very common. If you want statistical material, the youngest we interviewed is 8 years old, the oldest is 92. We interviewed more women than men simply because men have these experiences, but they don't want to be interviewed. They think, what will the world think of them? Even though we assured everybody we were going to change their names and whatnot in the book. So they're very, very common, and we found out over and over again that they fall into 12 different categories of types of experiences, and that's what I'll describe very briefly. If you have any questions, you can hold up your hand, I can stop and start again, or you can wait till the end. And at the very end, some of you, I'm going to ask you to come up here and share your own experience. Just pick one, and about 2 minutes apiece to share them, because that will make this whole presentation much more meaningful than me going blah, 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 when you hear it from each other. A few people did in the first part of our meeting here today, but some other people, I'm sure, have had experiences too. Okay? So, questions and answers, then sharing. Sensing a presence, this is very, very common, especially when somebody dies. People have this all the time, but they say, well, I'm just making this up, it's my imagination. So-and-so just died, naturally. I'm thinking about him or her, so I'm fantasizing that he or she is nearby. And one of the things totally separate from us, but we learned that almost all people attend their own funeral out of curiosity. That's to see what the turnout's going to be, things like that. But that's human, right? But aren't you curious? That's not in our early research, but anyway, they say I'm just imagining this. And if you do feel the presence of someone, very simple, at any point, and any of these experiences can occur within, well, before you're even notified of their death. From there to weeks, days, weeks, months, and years later. These don't all happen within the first 6 months, first year or 2 years. Some occur 10, 20, 30, 40 years later. So, but if somebody feels to be around you, and people can say, well, yes, I feel him over here, or over here, or over there, and they know when the person's there and when they've left. It's very specific. If you want to have communication, very simple. Sit down, close your eyes, take a few deep breaths, open your mind, reach out, and ask to receive a verbal message. Because they're coming for a purpose more than just to let you know they're there. And we'll get to that a little bit later. But basically, you'll receive a message, perhaps, if you're open to it. And some people hear, that's the second category, hearing a deceased relative or friend. They'll hear it with their ears, like you're hearing me now, audibly. However, the majority of communication is by telepathy. And it's very hard to describe. It's thought-to-thought, mind-to-mind contact. You can ask a whole question, receive an answer back and forth, and then you could have a two-way conversation. And in some cases, people do, especially widows and widowers who have been married for many, many years, and they're very used to having communications. That one dies, and they go on having two-way communications. For most people, though, it's a brief 1, 2, or 3 time affair, that kind of thing. So I met a woman who claimed that her husband had died, and they used to run a business together, and after he died, she made contact with him, and he gave her the same guidance as when he was alive, and she continued to run the business with his advice. So, these are exceptions, this is not the rule. And all these experiences can occur independently or together. So when I have to speak about them independently, like feeling a presence, hearing a voice, now feeling a touch. But these can occur, just like an actual meeting when you're together. Feeling a touch, you may feel a tap, a caress, even a stroke or some kind of a kiss on the lips or cheek or a hug. Some people, when they were alive, had a habit, especially kids, they walk by and kind of brush somebody's hair, kind of thing. All kinds of little mannerisms people have. And that's how you recognize who it is if it's a touch. Because these are only between people who would obviously recognize each other's touch, which is a very close relationship. And all these are, of course, different forms of affection, nurturing, and love. Smelling of fragrance is a fascinating category. Say olfactory makes it sound very paranormal. By the way, I don't like the words parapsychological or paranormal. It makes everything seem different than, other than, not normal and human. So I don't use any of those words, they're not in the book. And to me, these are normal and experiences that everyday people have, or people have every day, by the way. And they're nothing unusual. Because in other cultures, these are very, very common, which I'll speak about later too. So, but smelling of fragrance means smell of flower, cologne, aftershave, or perfume, or some scent, food, whatever it may be, that you associate with the one who's made their transition. And you know who it is, and you just feel a sense of well-being when you smell that. What's very unusual is that, think of, here we are in Chicago, but think of like northern Minnesota in the middle of the winter and whatnot. I don't think they have too many lilacs or roses or other flowers blooming outdoors or indoors. I think indoors, but not outdoors. But think about the coldest time period of the year. And maybe you're working at your office and maybe a cubicle or whatever, and all of a sudden the whole area is suffused with a scent of, say, roses. But you don't mention it to anybody, you just, and you know who they're from and what they mean to you. But somebody else comes walking by, starts sniffing the air, and they smell the roses. Then a third person comes along, and he or she smells roses. And so you may have a whole bunch of people, without anybody saying anything, all smelling the roses that are there. So these are shared experiences. So they're objective. It's not just the one who is having the experience, but also witnesses as well. So those can happen. There's a very beautiful account of a mother who saw a little girl died, and she came back from the cemetery, went in the house first, and the whole house was filled with the scent of roses for a little girl, and she took that as a wonderful sign from her daughter. Then a dozen more people came, and everyone except one smelled the roses without the mother saying anything, and there were no roses there. And the only one who didn't smell them was a woman who had never met the little girl when she was still physically alive. So even by indirection, sometimes you get evidence that these are real experiences. Okay, visual experiences. These are much more common than you may realize. And everything so far is when you're wide awake. We divided them into two categories, partial visual and full visual. Partial means that either they're less than fully solid, as we are to each other. In other words, you may be able to just see the wispy outline, or you may be able to see through them, so they're transparent. or maybe they're translucent, you can't see through, but they're not solid, on up to, but not quite solid. Or you may just see their head and shoulders, which is very common, or from the waist up, or the knees up, you don't see their feet. So anything less than seeing the full person is what we call partial visual. And then obviously the full visual is where you see the entire person who seems as solid to you as we do to each other. And these may seem very far out, but people have these experiences, and we have a whole chapter of everything I'm speaking about. We have a whole chapter in Hello from Heaven on these. So there's about 15 accounts of every one of these, just in that chapter, plus many other accounts in other chapters. So there are 353 full accounts in Hello from Heaven. In other words, it's a book of stories that people shared with us, and it's in their own words. We didn't change the language, and we're not just taking excerpts. But everyone has a beginning, a middle, and an ending, so it's a book of comfort, hope, and healing for everybody who reads it. And some people mentioned that earlier when they were introducing themselves. So when you see deceased loved one who's completely solid, and the beautiful part, now, especially if anybody here has had, or known anybody who's had a loved one who died, like say in a car crash, a fire, maybe in a war, in a battlefield. I could go on and on, but what I'm getting at, where the body is disfigured or worse in many ways. And this is a beautiful thing to hear, that when you see them, and I always have to say 99.99% of the time, because there's always an exclusion, there's always a reason for never being 100%. But 99.99% of the time, they will appear healed and whole and in perfect health, radiant health, much healthier, happier, and more whole than they were when they were on the earth in a physical body. I'm going to repeat that. If you see a deceased loved one who has died, regardless of when, how soon, or how long after his or her death, or regardless of the cause, will appear healed and whole and in radiant, perfect health. Usually they will have a smile on their face. Now there may be a one-way or two-way communication with you, or not, but just the smiles are assuring you they are okay. They are fine. You don't have to worry about them. Unfortunately, many in our culture, a parent often has to go down to a hospital and identify the body of their child and things like that, which, if it's been in a car crash, can be a very gruesome last image. But if they see their son or daughter after that, when they're healed and whole, they have a whole new picture to refer to, which is very fortunate. So these, all these experiences, not just seeing them with your eyes wide open and whatnot, can occur anywhere at any time. Many people see someone at the foot of their bed in the night, and then I began wondering, well, if the room is dark, and how can you see the person in detail? And the reason is they give off their own light. It's radiant light. Whole face, you can see in detail. And it's clear, and you can see their expression, and all this, as though the light were just as bright as the sunshine. And so at nighttime, it's just as, doesn't matter what time of day it is, that they will appear in great detail. And they may appear while you're at work. We have stories of people appearing on airplanes, in cars, on boats. The only thing we never heard of yet was on a train. But not that many people take trains, and that doesn't mean it doesn't occur. Just I have not yet heard of an account on a train yet. So it can be anywhere, anytime, and verbal communication may take place. A vision is another category. It's very hard to describe a vision. I've had a couple. For me, it was like seeing a 35 millimeter slide. The first one was large, 3 feet across and 2 feet high in color. Then another one was just a small little picture. And in the book, somebody else describes one as just being in black and white. It doesn't matter. It's very hard to verbalize it. It's like a hologram, but you're seeing a three-dimensional object in a two-dimensional plane, a plane. But you're seeing the deceased loved one through this dimension into the dimension where they are. We could call it the afterlife, call it heaven, whatever word that's up to you. We used, the title came to me one morning. I didn't think of it. and we had other titles, but Love from Heaven I just woke up with it one morning and that stuck and became the book title. Although publishers wanted to change it for various reasons, but it works. And so you can see them in their dimension. My daughter, by the way, I am a bereaved father. My daughter died. My younger daughter died a little over a year ago, April last year. And she was 47, and she took her own life, which was not totally unexpected. It was a shock when I found out when she did it, but she had attempted it before. And she was deeply depressed. She was bipolar and also had supposedly borderline personality disorder and things like that. The good news is, number one, I've seen her in a vision with my eyes open, and a little picture in front of my forehead right here. And I saw her, she was dancing, she was turning in a circle, and then also moving around in a circle. And she was laughing and happy. And also I've heard from her, we communicate by telepathy. And I've learned quite a bit. I don't have time to share it all, but she's doing fine. And that's not a big tragedy as it seems to be, which makes it a lot easier for me, of course, as a father. But that was the vision in my case. So you can see visions with your eyes closed or your eyes open. People often have them during meditation. That's why I say meditation is so good, because you can often see your loved one or deceased loved ones that way. That's up to you. One woman wanted to learn how to meditate. She did it so quickly. She found a teacher and she went out and said, "Teach me how," and she learned how. And she did it for so many hours a day that her daughter, who died in a plane crash in a foreign country, had to come to her and say, "Mom, stop. I have a life of my own now to go on with. Stop calling me back. I'm not coming anymore." And that was it. And she had to deal with it, but she had a lot of time with her daughter after she died. But by the way, they do have people die with a sense of humor, and we've heard a whole bunch of different stories like that, according to their language and wording and whatnot. And some people die in character. Some people are very angry. That's the way they die. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross used to spoke of that. And that's the way they come back, too. They can be very angry sometimes. Or whatever other... People don't change. They're not instantly enlightened. So if your uncle comes back and tells you to buy pork bellies or some other commodity... that's a commodity. Okay, wheat features, gold coin, gold... Whatever. Don't necessarily think he knows or she knows what you should do. They're still working on their stuff, okay, on the other side. So they're not all Buddhists just because they look this side. Okay, Twilight experiences, we didn't know about them until we were doing the full compilation for the book, and people use the same phrasing over and over and over. Just as I was falling asleep, or just as I was waking up in the morning. Meaning, it's called the alpha state. As you go from this is ordinary beta consciousness when you're awake to alpha to theta, delta. So as you're falling asleep or waking up. Except the interesting thing is as they wake up, if they were having what they thought was a dream, say about their father or whoever, they wake up, they open their eyes, there he is, standing by their bed, kind of thing. And again, a whole chapter of those in here. They're not that different, it's just these occur while people are meditating or praying just as much as when they're, because that's what you go into when you go into a deep meditation, you go into alpha and beta, same thing. ADC experiences while asleep. People will say, I had a dream, and then they immediately say, but it's unlike any other dream I'd ever had before. It was different. And typical dream is fragmented, it's symbolic, it kind of swims back and forth. In time, it's hard to hold on to. And even if you say, I'm going to remember it when I wake up, unless you write it down or tape record it or something, it usually slips away. These have a beginning, a middle, and an ending. They're usually in color, bright color, but not always. But they're very memorable, and it feels like an actual visit, that they came to visit you when you spend time together. It may be here in your ordinary dimension, your own home, or someplace else while you're asleep, doesn't matter where. But you know you've been together, and you can remember these experiences 10, 20, 30 years later with an exquisite detail. It's imprinted on your mind for some reason. And they're very common, because if you stop and think about it, it's very hard to get hold of each other during the daytime. You call somebody on the phone, you get voicemail. You send them an email, gets deleted. On and on and on. I'm not saying everybody, but I'm just saying we're very, very busy people in the United States. And it's hard to get hold of us. But while we're asleep, at least we're passive and in one place for a while. Hopefully. And they make contact more readily then. So a number of these experiences occur then. And sometimes you get information you can validate later on, evidential information. That's called the alpha state or sleep, just the same as when you're wide awake. The category I'd like to talk about the most is out-of-body ADCs. This is when we go out of our body. Like, let's see. I was raised Episcopalian. I was a Catholic convert. The girl I wanted to marry was Catholic. I later attended briefly a Unitarian Universalist church, and then more recently, if I go at all, it's still a Unity church. So, a variety of different Christian backgrounds. And the way I was led to believe when I read the books, some part of it's called our soul or our spirit. When we die, leaves our body, and if we're good, it goes up, and if it's not so good, we go elsewhere. Heaven, hell, and all that. And somehow, in doing this research, I became convinced of something different. And the way I say it now is, each of us now, right here, right now, in this room, is a spirit or a soul. We are wearing a physical body, which I call our earth suit. We need to have this earth suit to function at this level of reality. If I didn't have it, I couldn't hold the microphone. You wouldn't see me. You wouldn't hear me. I couldn't interact with anybody. And same for you if you didn't have your body. So this is our physical body. And it can stand an awful lot of things going wrong with it. I mean, all kinds of accidents and illnesses and whatnot. We're in a hospital. They treat all kinds of things. I compare it very much to an astronaut who goes EVA outside their Earth, outside their space capsule. Now, if that Earth, if their astronaut suit is punctured badly enough or whatever, it will cease to function. And the same for our physical body if it's injured badly enough. And the same for the deep sea diver, where the big heavy metal helmets that go down with the pressurized suits, they can only, they work fine, but if they don't function, the person wearing it inside will kill them instantly. And so we leave our body that way. So what I'm getting at is that some people are able to leave their body and have out-of-body experiences, and this is well documented. And some have done it and had an ADC, after-death communication experience, while doing it. In some cases, it's right in their own home, another part of the home, and the bedroom. In other cases, they go a few miles away, or several hundred miles away, or to the other extreme, actually visit the other side. And we have 5 accounts, as a matter of fact, where people have gone through a tunnel toward the light, and then in the light is their child or other deceased loved one is standing there. And they have a short visit, then they're told they must go back to their body. So these read just like a near-death experience, except this person left their bodies in no jeopardy whatsoever. They're in fine health. And they're good health. And yes, we're able to leave their body, but in some cases, for instance, a woman, a young mother, might be very concerned if she has a baby, a young child who dies, who will take care of it, because nobody in their family has died, no grandparents even, or anybody like that. And then they'll go and cross over and see that their children, they can recognize their child, regardless of age and whatnot, is there with other children, and that they are all kinds of spiritual helpers helping to raise their child. And then we're always asked, well, what about age? Do people stay old? No. When people are elderly and die, they often come back and appear much younger. So they can go back toward the time of their life. And in some cases, children may come back at the age that they literally made their transition, or they may choose to advance more rapidly toward the prime of their life. That's the only one that really accepts that, as far as I know, is the Mormon Church. That's one of their. The Mormons are. I'm not a Mormon, so I'm not giving a plug for it, but I can say that the Mormon Church is the most open to all of these experiences, and because the whole religion was founded on revelation, they record everything, and the historians and researchers are able to go through and compile all kinds of books about near-death experiences, after-death communications with elders, out-of-body experiences, about all kinds of stuff. And it's a whole rich treasure trove of stuff. Question?
I just want to go back to something you just said a minute ago about if we leave our bodies and our soul transfers into another realm, then how is it that we are recognized as being old or young or recognized?
I mean, after we die, how are we recognized?
Well, we leave the body, the physical body,
You mean for good, out-of-body experience, or for good?
for good.
For good, okay. How are we? Because people just sense, even though you may never have seen your mother when she was younger. Let's say she died when she was 80. You might not remember seeing her when she was 40, but you get it. You recognize her intuitively. It's an intuitive thing,
Okay.
and and they may choose to appear to you at the age that you would remember them. It depends. There are a whole bunch of accounts in Hello from Heaven where the people are much younger and they still recognize. So that's not a problem, apparently. I've never had that question before, but it's a valid one. Okay. People do what they want to do. And would you want to be look like you're 80 years old and kind of frail and infirmed, or would you like to be? And this is an interim step anyway on the other side. How we appear to each other, things of that nature. So it's I guess using our mind to create what we want, and how we appear to ourselves and to each other. Okay, but when they visit the other side during these out-of-body experiences and see their deceased loved one there, these accounts read just like a near-death experience where everything is filled with light and love and color, and nature is more vibrant and vivid than anything here on Earth, etc., etc. So these read very much like NDEs, except the people who had them were in good or normal state of health. By the way, when we interviewed people, some of the questions were, had you been drinking or taking any drugs or whatever other than ordinary drugs? And if they said yes, we eliminated whatever they told us. We didn't interview them. So we did a lot of controls when we were conducting the interviews. Telephone calls are a very small category. Basically, you can understand some people might be scared to see a deceased loved one, but if the phone rings, we're so conditioned we pick it up. And so they can be asleep and the phone rings, you pick it up, you hear a voice, it's whoever it is who has died. You have a two-way conversation. On the other hand, what happens if you're in the kitchen and the phone rings? You pick it up, and it's the voice of someone who's died. So it's a small category. Well, one man wrote an entire book called Phone Calls from the Dead, Scott Rogo. And you'll hear the voice, sometimes two-way communication, sometimes one-way. And the interesting thing is the voice will kind of like fade, but there'll never be a disconnect sound or a hang-up or a dial tone. It's always like the line has been severed. It's nothing. And that's the languaging that the people use. They say that themselves. Today, since we wrote our book, we're getting accounts of messages on pagers, on cell phones, on computers. Because electricity apparently is very easy to manipulate from the other side. And it's all these are electronic devices. And somebody just mailed me one with one short, like 6 words on it. I love you, Dad, something like that. It was just typed on a computer, and it had not been there before. Now, can somebody else have played a trick or a prank or something with the computer? All these things are possible, but when you hear enough of these accounts and read enough, you get to a sense of what's authentic, pretty much, I think. And you trust people. You have to trust people to some degree. Unless you want to say everybody we interview is a genital liar or wishful thinker or something like that. We have 6 chapters of why that's not so. So physical phenomena can involve anything and everything, such as lights. Very common in Florida for lights to go off or anywhere else. But how about lights going on, one after the other, all different rooms, and then a microwave and a TV and a radio and all kinds of things going on. So it would be all kinds of maybe a radio starts playing and you hear a song that you associate only with your loved one who's died. Or maybe an anniversary date, or a date you're feeling especially blue, time you're feeling especially blue and sad, and you hear that one song you identify with that person. In my case, for my daughter, it's a Beatles song, Here Comes the Sun, as she went, Here Comes the Sun, which will take an explanation, but whenever I hear that, that's my song with her, for what it's worth. When we have different ones with different people, husbands, wives, children, so. Again, it's mechanical objects may start working, even toys, or like music boxes may start playing spontaneously, and you know who gave it to you, and often these are again on an anniversary date, the date of their birth or your birth, or the date of their death, or a date of the marriage, all different kind of things like that. Not only then, but often it's associated with a particular date. Things can be moved, like a photograph may appear here, and then you live alone. It's right by your bed. But somehow, the next thing you know, it's on the kitchen table. Okay, how did it get there? I don't know. And you'll see it's in a third place or a fourth place. And things get moved around. We have an account with a large picture, usually with wire from a nail or whatever on a wall. But rather than just if the wire had broken, it would come down, maybe glass would break, or it would be at the foot of the wall. Instead, it's out in the middle of the floor of the room. How do you explain things like that? And people have a sense of who would have done this, and who has a sense of humor in what they do, whatever. And finally, the big chapter. And if you've never had an experience at all and you'd like to have one, this is the easiest one to have, other than praying that they visit you while you are asleep. This is a symbolic ADC. This is asked. Almost everybody does it anyway, if they're old enough. They say, if whichever one of us goes first, come back and give me a sign you still exist. Right? Nobody's specific exactly, but they say, give me a sign. And there's a belief that somebody can and will do that. And then we call that a pact, P-A-C-T, a pact. And they receive them. And it can be anything at all, but the most common ones involving symbolic things involve butterflies and rainbows. And a butterfly, because in our Western culture, is the symbol for life after death because of the metamorphosis from the caterpillar through the cocoon to the butterfly. It's right there in front of us. But it's not just seeing a butterfly, it's the behavior of the butterfly. It may come and may land on your shoulder, or Wayne Dyer describes one landing on his hand, and other people describe butterflies landing on them. And I'm not just speaking inside a butterfly garden where they're all around, but outside. It's the behavior of the butterfly. There's a beautiful story of one landing on a cask and there throughout the entire service of the little girl. And then it leaves when it's over. Or you walk out in your backyard and you see a whole swarm of a butterfly that's not even familiar to you. It might be just there for 30, 60 seconds, 90 seconds, and then it breaks off. They leave. Or you might be out walking in nature and a butterfly will kind of guide you. And if you follow it, it just flies slowly enough to guide you to some special place that feels very warm and nurturing and comforting to you. And you get a feeling for who it is who's doing that. So rainbows, again, seeing those on certain dates, certain places, or even a double rainbow. And from the Old Testament of Noah and whatnot, the rainbow is a symbol of hope. And there's a beautiful story in the book with a mother who went to the cemetery in the second anniversary of the death of her child. And she was with a friend, and the friend said, turn around, and she does. She sees not one, but a double rainbow right behind her at that moment. We have somebody else earlier on mentioned finding dimes. It's a beautiful long account below from heaven. It's too long to recount now, but I'm finding dozens and dozens and dozens of dimes, and she kept a journal on every one she found. And then she told her husband, he began finding them, and others began finding them. And there were several hundred dimes, and still more were being added on. People find all kinds of things, feathers, ladybugs, you name it. We were driving, Diane and I were driving around yesterday. She said, look at that. It was a Volkswagen Beetle with little things on it, so they look like a ladybug. It's called a bug and had little red splotches. But that's not what I mean exactly, but I thought I'd mention it. Anyway, fine coins, feathers, any kind of thing that you associate with the one that's made his or her transition. And also it's the behavior of birds. Many people have a bird visit, one or more birds. And it's, again, the behavior. They come peck at a window or come and land near you. I've heard well over 25 species of birds at this point. We had about 10 or 15 when we did the book, but I keep hearing new ones all the time. And it's, again, the behavior of a wild bird it's that you associate with this one person who love birds or identify with a specific bird, what that bird does. And you have to read these stories. It's not just, you can't capture them just with words. There is a beautiful one, there are others involving deer, but there's a beautiful one in the book about porpoises, and this young man loved porpoises and loved the Gulf of Mexico where he lived and all that outdoor wildlife. And he died, and so the desire was to bury the ashes out in the Gulf and release them, not bury them, but to release them. And when the boat went out, a whole school or a whole group of porpoises swam out with the boat until they released the ashes, and then the porpoises just disappeared, and then they went back to shore. So these are almost poetic when you read them. They were, not almost, they are very poetic, very moving. And it's just very touching. Anyway, the point of it is all these contacts, whatever form they take, offer comfort, reassurance, and hope. They want us to know. They want you to know. They're still alive. They're well. They're healed. They're whole. They're okay. And we will have reunion with them when we make our own transition. They will be there to greet us, to meet us. Now, you probably, a number of you have heard that through other books and whatnot, that people who are dying often report seeing a deceased loved one in the room. They're called deathbed visions. We didn't include them. We didn't have the room in the first book. We have a whole chapter full of people who were there who also saw the one or ones who came to help the person who's dying. So nobody dies alone, at least when there's opportunity like a long illness, like a cancer or leukemia and things like that. So when they see they're saying, my brother, my mother, my son, my whoever, sometimes a third person of the hospice personnel or family member or anybody can also see and can even communicate with one or more other beings in that room. One case, the room was filled with beings. And, but you don't hear, so far nobody's written about this yet. We call them bedside experiences. We will have reunion when it's our time to make our transition. And there'll be often one or more who will be there to meet us and greet us. And the typical message is, because keep in mind there are two parts of grief. One is our concern for the one who died. Does he or she still exist? If so, how are they? Where are they? What are they feeling? What are they doing? All that. And in our culture, unfortunately, a great deal of doubt that they even do survive. The other part is our sense of loss. It's, for those of us who do believe in life after death, we can still feel a tremendous absence. My word is emotional amputation. It feels like an emotional amputation to have a loved one leave. Whether, in other words, like an arm or a leg or something being gone. And with me, it's been a daughter. For others, some people, it's a pet. Because they didn't have any children. But whatever. All these experiences that I'm reporting, they're trying to let us know they are okay. We don't need to be concerned for them. So their messages typically are, I'm okay. This is verbally or non-verbally, by their look or actual words. I'm okay, I'm fine, everything is okay, don't worry about me, don't grieve for me. I'm happy, everything will be all right, go on with your life, your own life. Sometimes it's like a guardian angel message, I'll always be there for you, I'm watching over you, I'll see you again. They may come back again, another ADC, or maybe when we make our transition, we join them on their side, doesn't matter. Stated or not stated, I believe every one of these is saying, I love you. These are messages of love. This is all about love. And that's why I'm so happy to be able to give this talk over and over and over again. I've been doing it for 23 years, mostly for bereaved parents at the Compassionate Friends and bereaved parents of the USA and other support groups for parents who've lost children, or grandchildren or siblings and that kind of thing. And then sometimes I'll say goodbye, meaning I'm not coming back again. But that's a temporary goodbye, it's not forever. All of these offer, provide comfort, hope, and healing. Having an ADC, one or more of these, tends to reduce the intensity of the grief and also shorten the duration. It doesn't magically erase it. Although, if it's a very distant relationship, it may. But usually it doesn't totally eliminate it. And occasionally you may get a message for a friend or a relative. And if you do, please find a way to deliver it, especially near-death experiencers. Many of them have ADCs as an after effect. They never had them before, but now they have these somewhat regularly, and they don't know what to do. I don't want to appear totally cuckoo to their friends and neighbors, but I say, just say I had the weirdest dream. Call it a dream, whatever you want. Find a way to say it so you feel okay, and just say that your son or your brother or whoever it was in you, this is what they want you to know, and you can report it that way. People will thank you in that case. They won't think you're the nutcase, after all. But so please try to deliver a message if you receive one. Some people in our culture, especially when we wrote the book, thought they're losing their mind, they're going crazy when they have one of these experiences. Interestingly, by digressing very briefly, near-death experiences were not really accepted by most churches until very, very recently. And I'm speaking of they call them satanic deception and all kinds of other things like that. They just wouldn't speak in Christian churches, both Catholic and Protestant. And until more recently, then with Don Piper's book, 90 Minutes in Heaven, that broke the door open. And then there are 2 books by young boys now that are doing very well. But one of the speakers here, Diane had, I think will go further than all of them, and that's Mary C. Neal, MD. She's the orthopedic surgeon who spoke. And I think her credentials, and there's another book coming out by a man I'm working with in Virginia, who's also spoke here, Evan Alexander III. He has a book coming out. He's a neurosurgeon. So you have 2 very competent physicians, and I think their NDE accounts are going to blow the lid off in terms of validation. That a whole lot of people who would not accept these before, meaning the medical establishment and whatnot, were going to take heed when both books were out, which delights me entirely. We have 6 chapters of why are these real, and not just grief-induced hallucinations, which is what they were called for decades. And some people were given drugs for having psychotic experiences, by the way, and we're not happy with that, but that's the way they were treated. So it's called magical thinking, wish fulfillment, imagination, fantasies, memories. I still get that language. Oh, just memories. No, because we have 6 chapters, and like in one of them, people were told information they did not have before about where something was located. In some cases, something was missing, they didn't know where to find it. In other cases, they didn't even know it existed. They were told where to go in their home or elsewhere to find something of value, whether it's financial value or sentimental value or whatever. The first category, actually, not why are these real, is you're in Chicago, okay. Pretend tonight somebody comes and visits you, okay, whoever, and you wake up tomorrow morning and you're sad because you don't understand, but this person came and said, I love you, thank you very much for being my friend or whatever, and goodbye. You're kind of puzzled a little bit. Then you get a phone call or an email or something confirming that a friend or a relative of yours had been killed in an automobile accident or some other sudden death in California. Or, in other words, you having the experience before you even learn of their death. You're not bereaved in that case. I'm speaking now of a sudden death, not somebody dying of cancer, which you're kind of expecting perhaps. So we have a whole chapter of, we call them ADCs before the news, before you are informed. And then finding something of value. A third one is where somebody's life is protected or saved by an ADC. I told you about my son and how I prevented him from drowning. I was told to go and check the pool. And Christine, nobody uses language, isn't it? Do this now. It's an emergency. It's always very direct, like indirect. Like look out the window, and they will know. Canada, she looked out the window, saw that the barn was on fire, and the wind was coming toward the house. So they would call the fire department. And all kinds of different ways of being notified. So, especially in a car, you're told to stop, or stop here, or slow down, or whatever. Do it. May save your life. And so you waste a few seconds, but probably save your life, or at least you'll be very happy that you did so. We have a whole chapter of people who are in the process of thinking about or planning to commit suicide, take their own life. The deceased loved one came at just the right time to intervene, and these people did not take their life. It wasn't the special words they said, it was just that somebody came at that very moment, and two people were in the act of doing it. Somebody came at that moment and dissuaded them from doing it. Perhaps that they felt somebody cared. I think you can feel very lonely at times. We have a whole chapter of people two people, same place, same time, sharing an experience. Basically, I'd like people who've had an experience to come up here. You have only 15 minutes. Please come up, form a line. Don't be bashful. This is your chance to help other people here better than I can. I know some of you are. So come on. We're being very shy.
I have a question. What is your comments about Edgar Casey?
What are my comments about Edgar Casey? I don't really have any comments about Edgar Casey.
Have you gotten anything?
One way or the other, but it's not part of our research.
Okay, but
So
on a personal basis, have you gotten?
I don't want to speak about anything during the talk that's not based upon our research.
Okay.
Come on, people. We need half a dozen more. Let's come up and line up and share your experience.
Oh, you did.
And I'll answer other questions after, because I'm out of here at 5. So that's not what I want to do. I can talk for 3 hours on this, but not all. So pick one experience, 2 minutes, no more than 2 minutes.
My daughter has done every experience that you've mentioned, but she also sends photos. This is a photo I'd like to share with all of you that a friend of a friend had taken out of an airplane window. I have a foundation for my daughter, and this is our logo, and she sent the angel in the sky. I can come around and show you all. She sends photos all the time.
Thank you. Very beautiful picture. I can see it.
Yes, I've told this story here before, but, and I've actually had others, but I'll mention this one again because it was probably one of the most profound. My grandmother on my mother's side had never met my wife, and for several years when I would go to visit down in Virginia, she lived on a farm, she would always ask me, Roz, when am I going to meet your wife? And I would say, well, maybe the next time I come, I'll bring her with me. Well, one night while at home back in northwest Indiana, I had a dream. And in this dream, it was my grandmother sitting at a window. The room, if you can call it that, was filled with shadow. And there was a window with a lot of light coming through it, a golden light. And there were white curtains kind of blowing with this window being open. And my grandmother was sitting in this chair. And I walked up to her, and she said, "You finally brought your wife." And I turned around, and there was my wife standing behind me. And I said, and I introduced them, and then we walked off into this shadow. That same night, some minutes later, I got a phone call from my mother that my grandmother had died. So she never did really get a chance to meet my wife in this life, but somehow she was able to make that connection in the afterlife. So.
Very much.
My nephew passed away at the end of July. I started watching these programs at night, Survival and Back, and I thought, I saw someone say to their deceased spouse, if you can, contact me through electricity. So it's 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm watching this TV and I'm thinking, come on, John, contact me through electricity. And I couldn't sleep. There was no sleeping. So I decided I was going to go downstairs in the basement and go work out on the treadmill. So I get on the treadmill, turn on the TV, just doing my thing. All of a sudden, the lights start flickering. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's just a fluke. I don't buy it. John, if that's you, you got to do better than that. So, sure enough, about 3 minutes later, the lights go flicker, flicker. The treadmill turns off. That's John again. The lights turn off. The TV turns off. The treadmill turns off. And I'm like, oh my God, that's good. And I just sat down and started talking to him, and it just blew my mind. And then my son comes downstairs several hours later, and as he walked in the room, the lights flickered. Then my husband walked into the room another hour and a half after that, and the lights flickered. And we don't have a problem with electricity, That same Thanksgiving, which I have several things that took place. I don't know if you even have the time for all the things that have happened to me, but at Thanksgiving, the family got together, and this was the first time that my brother and his wife had been to my house at around Thanksgiving, and they came into the room. They came into my kitchen, and we all, for the first time without any other company, just the family, the nuclear family, were sitting at the table, and the lights were just dancing and dancing and dancing. And my brother, who doesn't believe in any of this, is like, what is up with your electricity? What is going on? So, he was blown away by that. And then, I have one more other story. I just walked for the Walk for Autism. My son is autistic. And I did this Walk for Autism, and a butterfly landed on my shoulder right at the beginning of the walk. And I was like, it's John.
Thank you very much.
My father in the early 60s had a heart attack and then a stroke. And he deteriorated very, very slowly but very perceptibly over a number of years and did not die until 1986. So that was a long haul for him to get worse and worse and finally be in the bed. And he talked to the walls. And the nurses would say, I'd call and say, how's Daddy doing? Well, he's had a big conversation with the wall again. And so about maybe 5 years after that, I had this marvelous dream that was very vivid, and I still tell about it. We were in my family's living room, and it starts off that we're all very happy because we've been to Europe together, and we've had this wonderful trip. And so we're all laughing and giggling and talking about our trip, and my father says, would you children, I have a sister who just died, and a brother who's living, and he said, would you kids like to come out and see my workroom? And we said, oh sure Daddy, that would just be great. And so we went out to this sort of, looked like a, control room of some sort, but the windows were black, you couldn't really see anything out the windows, but he had all this gear and these knobs and these buttons, and he had headphones that he put on, and he was extremely busy. And so then he said, Catherine, would you like to experience what I do all day? Mm-hmm. And I said, oh Daddy, I just would love that. And we had a big smile between us, and I put the gear on, and he told me how to do the buttons and everything. And so I was very excited, and my sister and brother were in the back. They were standing in back of me, and so I kept fiddling and fiddling, and I turned to him, we had face-to-face communication, and I said, Daddy, I said, I don't hear anything, and I don't say anything. And he said, no, honey, he said, because that's my work.
That was it.
No, I mean that he was serious. To me, it was that when he was talking to the walls, he was communicating, and that explained my biggest worry about the way that he died.
Thank you. Next.
Okay, I'll be real short. My mother and my grandmother come whenever I need them, and they tell me if there's anything important that's going to happen to ADCs, so it doesn't happen. And my mother came 3 times before my brother was hospitalized, and before I could figure out what it was about. So I had to call him and say, are you okay? And he said he was fine, but he wasn't, so I went and got blood work done and was hospitalized. Thanks.
I didn't mean to rush you into visual.
That's okay, I was timid to get up anyway.
You did fine.
The first biggest loss in my life was in 2000 when my boyfriend, who I loved dearly, passed away. And I started coming to IANDS here in 2002. But right after he passed away, and he had died after a lifetime struggle with addiction, with drugs and alcohol. And when we lived together, I had a cat named Valentino, and he had this mock hatred of Valentino. I think he was jealous of him, actually. But he used to say things like, well, he's so dumb, I'm just going to have to kick him through the goalposts of life. Oh, he was from Texas, by the way, so he had this inimitable Texan accent. And, well, anyway, he passed away first. Valentino was still well and alive, and he managed to kick himself, Mark, through the goalposts of life. But I went to the video store shortly after he passed away, and it was this Korean video store when they used to have these small mom-pa chains for, Netflix took over and all of that. And I went to the counter because I decided I was going to rent the movie Ghost. And on the counter there was this very strange piece of paper that said, congratulations to all the boys who have crossed over and to all the boys who are still working on crossing over. And it referred to some kind of martial arts competition that these Korean kids were having, but I thought that is so bizarre and coincidental. So I rented the movie Ghost. I went home, I put it in my VCR at the time, and you know how it gets to that point in the movie, if any of you know it, where the where Patrick Swayze comes back, he's died, but Demi Moore can't see him, but the cat does, and the cat spooks. Well, just as I was watching that in the movie, my cat Valentino was sitting across from me in this rocking chair, and I sort of felt the presence of Mark right here at my side, and I said to him in my head, you think you could spook what I call Valentino hymns? You think you could spook hymns? And Mark said, clear as day in my head, no, hymns is too dumb to spook. But lo and behold, just a few minutes later, all of a sudden, I saw my cat just go. And there were a few other signs down the road, that related to other kind of comical things. Mark had a great sense of humor. When I used to complain to him that he couldn't keep a job, he used to say, well, what do you want me to do, Mook? You want me to go out there and put on a sandwich board on myself that says I'll do anything with anyone for a quarter? Well, after he died, I began to find pennies all the time by the door of my car. When I go to the grocery store, when I go to the drugstore, when I just be out anywhere visiting anyone. It happened with a frequency that was much more than coincidental. So one time I was in Denver with my daughter visiting, and I was parked in the parking lot of a grocery store. And it was in the early evening, and this clearly homeless alcoholic came up to me and said, ma'am, can you spare some change or some money for me? And I said, I just felt this moment of great inspiration. And I said, how much do you need? And he said, I need $27 to spend the night over here. And I said, well, boy, that's more than I'm used to giving guys on the street. But I reached in my purse and I gave him $27. And lo and behold, I went back to my car, and this time there were 2 pennies right next to the door. So, and I heard him in my head constantly talking to me and reminding me of funny things he had said to me. So I know these things happen. I know they're for real. My father passed away in 2010, and I've had a lot with him too. But that's for another time.
My son Noah passed away when he was 28, about a little over a year ago. My husband and I went to Florida. We got away a few months ago, and as I was riding my bike into town one morning, I was thinking about how grief feels like a knot in my stomach and in my chest, and it's been that way constantly since he died. Once in a while, the knot will loosen when I see something beautiful or feel some sort of comfort, but then the knot comes right back. And I got into town and I looked across the street and there was a little store with a sign that says, "Why not?" K-N-O-T. And I'd been thinking about this whole knot business for about 15, 20 minutes. I thought, I need to go in there. Maybe there's something cute that I should buy for myself. So I went in there and there was music playing, and I was browsing, looking for something green, maybe a green dress, because green was Noah's favorite color, and I've been sort of obsessed with it. And the music stopped, and a new song came on, and the song was, well, when my son was 8, he was on TV, because he did an imitation of the Bulls starting lineup. He was sort of a local celebrity in Chicago. And the music to the Bulls starting lineup came on in Florida. And I just sort of smiled and said, "Hi, Noah." And I tried on the green dress and didn't look good. But I was feeling very happy and very peaceful. And as I left the dressing room, there was another dress hanging there with a necklace around it. Now my son, I've thought a lot about the story of Noah from the Bible. And when Noah set the dove free, and the dove came back with the olive branch in his mouth, it is a message of hope, I think. And I also think a lot about the number 5, because we're a family of 5, even though this necklace, and it's a dove, it's a branch, and it's 5 little stones. So that's my sign. And ever since then, I still cry all the time, but I feel a lot more peaceful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Patients are a natural, normal part of life. I said earlier, I don't like the words paranormal or normal. It is part of life, and we need to be accepted as that. They also provide modern-day evidence for life after death, very much so, we believe. And the final words I'd like to leave you with are the final words of the love from heaven. That is, life and love are eternal. Thank you very much.